I am going to be filming a video to talk about my characters. I'm going to start the first part of the video with sort of a breakdown on the story itself. That way the characters have a little bit of context behind them, and so you kind of, have an idea of how they all fit into the story. This is going to be the first installment of this series. I do plan on making videos in the future talking about more of my stories because not all of my dolls fit into this one. So before I get too in depth about the premise of the story, it is a YA contemporary story. I have multiple stories that I base my dolls off of. This particular video will be to focus on Andrew's story and the characters in his world. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Right now, I have Andrew because he's the main character of the first story I'm going to be talking about. So the story is set about 4 months after Andrew's best friend passes away unexpectedly. This is about 4 months before Andrew starts his senior year. Essentially what the story's about is him trying to piece his life back together after the death of somebody who he was very close with. And the fact that Andrew has a tendency to want to escape reality. He is not somebody who's very present anyway. He is a very shy person. He's very quiet. He keeps to himself, and he's usually kind of in La La Land. And after something this tragic has suddenly happened in his life, he sort of just blocks it out. Without realizing it, that's pretty damaging to him. He's not willing to face what's really happened. For anybody who knows how it feels to have to grieve the loss of a loved one, it's no easy task, and it's easy to forget that there's still responsibilities and there's still things outside of that, even though this feeling is very consuming. When it is, especially for Andrew, as somebody who's generally pretty disconnected from life overall. He is very shy and very in his own head all the time anyway. Throughout this story, he is trying to sort of get to the bottom of why his friend unexpectedly passed away. It was sadly the result of an overdose. He is convinced that the person in particular who gave his friend, Sean, the drugs, he thinks he knows a little bit more than he's letting on. He's trying to figure out what exactly led up to this. Throughout the story, the way River, who I will later talk about, comes in to his life early on in the school year and kind of leaves her mark on him. He finds her company to be somewhat of a distraction. Throughout the book, it slowly becomes sort of unhealthy. He's avoiding so many things in his life right now. School, his brother, which I will touch on later, even talking about certain things with his mom. He doesn't want to have to feel the pain, and in his idealistic way of being, places a lot of expectations on River without even realizing it. River has a boyfriend. She has a life outside of Andrew, and he thinks that somehow he's just gonna magically make her his girlfriend and she's gonna be the cure-all, which that's not how life works. And he's not really facing the reality of their friendship either. That's a very unfair expectation to hold her to. She thinks of Andrew as a very genuine friend, and she cares about him and cares about their friendship, but she doesn't have a motive for it. Whereas in the beginning, maybe Andrew didn't feel this way, but progressively he, in some ways, starts to have a motivation for their friendship, other than just being content with being in her life. He thinks that her being there is magically going to make all of this pain and all of these problems just disappear, and that's not the case. Later on, the rising point of the book, if you will, they get into a big fight about it. River's really considering not continuing to pursue a friendship with him. Andrew's beginning to act recklessly, and out of grief, he's angry. And despite Andrew losing his stepfather years prior, he has never really been well equipped to deal with these sort of emotions. In the past, Andrew has always sort of distracted himself with excelling in sports. He just works out like crazy and, goes for runs every single morning to take his mind off of things. He is a very dedicated person, but it has in the past reached a point where it's unhealthy, but it's gone unnoticed because these things seem like healthy, ideal lifestyle choices, being athletic, being fit, when really the reason he's doing it is a bit deeper than that and a bit more destructive. Once Sean is no longer in his life, he kind of freaks out because these things are like no longer working. Because in the past, he kind of just slapped a band-aid over it, and that band-aid is beginning to fail him. He is suddenly infatuated with this girl and thinks that she can kind of be a band-aid in a sense. They're always going on adventures, and he misinterprets that as something that it's not. They do fun things that friends should do together. He reads into it more than he should, even though those boundaries have already been set for him. Meanwhile, he's 1, neglecting his grief, and 2, chasing this girl. He's also neglecting the fact that his brother is still really struggling with the loss of their dad. For lack of better words, much more angsty than Andrew. He's more defiant. He's more of the troublesome sibling. And he doesn't even have all of the coping mechanisms that Andrew does. Granted, not all of Andrew's coping mechanisms are healthy. Sydney lacks them entirely. He spends time in his room completely isolated from his family, really. He doesn't want to socialize. He doesn't want to connect with them. He wants to isolate, which is very destructive long term. There's nothing wrong with wanting to take time to yourself when you have something pretty serious going on, but it turns into this very unhealthy cycle. Instead of getting the help that he really needs, he self-medicates, and his mom isn't really around. She works 2 jobs. She's very busy trying to provide for them. So she isn't really seeing the full picture of what it is that's going on with Sydney, and neither does Andrew, because Andrew and Sydney have never had a very strong bond, and a lot of that is because of some resentment that Sydney holds over Andrew. He always felt that Andrew was the favorite child because their stepdad, Carlson, who is Sydney's biological father, Sydney is Andrew's half-brother, he spent more time paying attention to Andrew because he didn't want Andrew to feel left out or disconnected from the family because he wasn't Carlson's biological son, So he thought by doing certain things with Andrew that it would make him feel special, and that it would sort of compensate and make things better, which for Sydney, they didn't. Sydney saw this as Andrew being treated as the favorite, which, of course, Carlson never wanted. He loves his sons equally, and he thought he was doing the right thing. Since Andrew was very, very young, would go boxing together because Carlson loves to box, and he started incorporating Andrew into it. He started teaching him these things that he didn't teach Sydney. He wanted there to be something special that Carlson and Andrew could do together. You know, he wanted to build that bond with Andrew. You know, he was even shyer and quieter as a child and very reserved, you know, so he wanted to find ways to have fun with him. It was not something that Sydney ever took interest in, so it wasn't really a jealousy thing over what activity they partook in. It was just the premise of feeling left out in general. So when Andrew's very distracted with all of his shit going on, he isn't really taking any time to find out how his brother's doing. They kind of have a broken relationship. And Andrew doesn't really realize that. That's the thing, is it's really all that Andrew has ever known. I don't think it really registers to him until later on in the story that he doesn't really know his brother as a person, and realizes that it genuinely does upset Sydney. Even though Sydney doesn't really know how to reach out all the time, he really does idolize Andrew to a certain extent. That ends up being a pretty significant point in the plot. Some things happen that kind of snap Andrew back to reality between what ends up happening with his brother and the fight that he gets into with River and the scene that he causes with some of his classmates. That's when everything kind of just comes to a head and he realizes, yeah, maybe my behavior is a little toxic. Wow. Anyway, I think that is a pretty good place to leave off with the general plot of the story. Of course, I left out lots of things and more so what happens in the end, but I plan on sharing that with you guys in more depth in later videos, or you know, if I ever end up sharing my writing on this platform, I kind of want to save some of the juicy parts. And plus, I just kind of wanted to preface the character breakdowns with a little bit of story. That way, you'd kind of have an idea as to how all of these characters are actually incorporated and what their significance is to the story. Because, I mean, I could tell you about them all day, but it wouldn't really matter if there was nowhere to put them. I apologize now if at this point in the video I start looking down a little bit. That's because I have some notes here with me. Having it here in front of me will help sort of organize my thoughts as well. That way I don't come on tangents, because I like to do that. Let's get into these character breakdowns. So first off, Andrew's full name is Andrew Elijah Foster, and his family members and most of his close friends call him Danny. He and his parents never really liked the shortening of Andrew. You know, you could call him Drew, you could call him Andy. They like Danny and Andrew. Danny's just, you know, sort of a spin on the letters that his name already consists of, so it's just kind of natural. Other than that, there aren't a lot of other reasons for why they chose his name Andrew or Elijah. They just really liked the names. His height, he's 6'3", and he is between 17 and 18 years old during the time of the story. And this isn't going to be the only story that he's in, and that's why I say during the time of the story. All of my characters exist within the same universe and sometimes make small appearances in other stories, because a lot of the stories that I have are set in the same town and the students attend the same high school, so there will be some crossover to an extent, even if they don't play a huge role. He doesn't know his dad, his biological father at least, and he doesn't really look like his brother. He has some of the same features as his mom, but his complexion and hair color texture is significantly different from his brother and mom, but he doesn't actually know much about his background. His eyes are not supposed to be the color that they are in this doll, but this was all I had that looked nice on him. They're more of a hazel with like a little bit of like a gray. And his mom's eyes are blue, and so are his brothers. Carlson's eyes are blue. Now that we've kind of gone over some of his like general traits, Andrew typically wears his hair slicked back. He keeps it relatively short. I mean, this is about how I pictured it. Not buzz cut short, but he keeps a very clean cut. You know, he also does a lot of sports, so he tries to keep a nice, clean, tidy hairstyle. Some things about him, as far as religion goes, he is Christian, and he is the only family member that still goes to church after his stepfather passes away. His stepfather was a religious man, but the rest of his family couldn't really bring themselves to go after he passed. Andrew goes because it makes him feel like he's still connected with his father. Andrew also wears a cross, and it was one that belonged to his dad. So I'll get into some fun facts about Andrew. Not all of these facts are gonna be fun, but I didn't know what else to call them when I was writing this journal, so I'm like, hey, fun facts. Andrew played on the football team. Senior year, he doesn't, because he started losing a lot of motivation to do these things that were once a distraction for him because they're not working, you know? So he's like, well, fuck it. Like, I don't really feel like trying at anything right now, to be honest with you. He's on the track team, but football. He also has some beef with one of the fellow members on the team who dealt Sean the pills. So he doesn't really want to return. He's like, no, I'm good. Another thing is Andrew has suffered from panic attacks from a very young age and started going to therapy pretty early on in his life. He was put on antidepressants when he was in middle school. He no longer goes to therapy though. On to some more just fun little tidbits about him. His favorite food is spaghetti. He hates coffee, olives, and the smell of old books. I can second that. I don't know how people like the smell of old books. They smell foul. Ugh. Anyway, his favorite song is Benny and the Jets. He listened to it a lot growing up with Sean and Sean's dad. It was Sean's dad's favorite song, and they listened to it a lot. You know, Andrew started hanging around Sean even more when he was a freshman. That was when his dad suddenly passed away. They'd always been friends, but he started to feel very appreciative of the fact that he still had somewhat of a male role model in his life. He was very close with Sean's dad. He no longer took it for granted. Andrew loves chocolate ice cream and eats it every day after school. Andrew's actually a really good cook. He is responsible for most of the housework and the cooking in his household. His mom is constantly working and pretty much always gone. It was never assigned to him, but somebody kind of had to take over the responsibility, you know, so he kind of slowly just took over and started doing it. Even though he hates it, he gets overwhelmed in a very crowded space. He's a very clean, tidy person. His hair, his clothes, his room. So despite having a wide knowledge of self-defense, he's never actually gotten into a fight with anybody, except for what happens later on in the book. And that's why I guess this statement is important, is because he's never actually hurt anybody. He's never had to, he's never wanted to. He's the type of person who doesn't even squash spiders in his room, and he is not an aggressive person. He usually is just even more quiet than he already was. He doesn't show his anger. He is actually a bit hot-headed. That's sort of like the significance of his behavioral changes throughout the story. You know, he starts doing some irresponsible things and starts to become much more visibly angry, you know? And that's not him at all. He might be hot-tempered, but To any onlooker, he would be the type of guy that's, you're like, oh, haha, Andrew? Ah, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Which he probably wouldn't. Another little thing about him, when he gets angry, his ears get red. In these fun facts about the characters, I also wrote one of like their biggest downfalls, or character flaws, if you will. I would say that Andrew is generally a pretty good guy. He's a kind person, he's a respectful person, but I mean, he has his flaws. And one of them being the fact that he's so idealistic. Because of this, places a lot of expectations on people without knowing it. He likes things to go the way he envisions them. He is always living in his head. So when things don't go the Andrew way, he's kind of like, oh, you stabbed me in the heart. He takes it as a betrayal almost, you know, if somebody doesn't live up to these expectations, he has unknowingly placed on them, and I mean, they don't know the expectations have been placed on them. It's all in Andrew's like head, and a lot of it is subconscious. You know, he doesn't intentionally mean to do this, but he does it, and he does it a lot. And this causes a lot of tension in his personal relationships, whether that be with his friends, his parents, his potential love interests, you know. Throughout the story, it tries to get better about it after the whole boiling point. It's something that's going to take a lot for him to break. He's a very passionate person, and he needs to essentially find a way to channel this passion into more productive things that don't piss people off. So to end it on a more positive note, he plays the piano, which Sydney also knows how to play the piano, and Carlson taught them both. But next, I am going to talk about River. So I've talked enough about Andrew, and so I also figured that you'd like a little change of scenery. Her full name is River Ophelia Carson, and her nickname is Birdie. That nickname was given to her by her dad when she was pretty young. She actually got that nickname from when she was a kid. She ended up jumping off of a play structure and telling all the kids at school that she could fly. She broke her arm, and really all of this was in order to sort of grab attention from her father. Her mom also passed away when she was quite young, and that's sort of a bonding point between River and Andrew. The fact that they've both lost a significant family member in their life. Her dad was very distracted and grieving, much like Andrew is, and I think that's part of why she's unintentionally drawn to Andrew. She no longer lives with her dad. She actually lives with her uncle, and I will get into more of that later. But that's honestly a big reason as to why she wants to help Andrew and support him. He represents so many things that she's already so familiar with. You know, she is naturally very comfortable around him. The reason she was named River is because she was conceived by the ocean. And that was actually when her dad proposed to her mom. It was at a lighthouse. You might be wondering, well, if she was conceived by the ocean, why is her name River? Well, her mom didn't really like any ocean-themed names, like Ocean, Oceana, things like that. But despite not liking those names, she still kind of wanted to pay ode to the body of water and named her River. Ophelia, there's no real reason behind it. She just really liked the name. She is 17 to 18 years of age during the story, and River is actually the main protagonist in her own story that takes place about a year and a half later after the events of Andrew's story. You get like a completely different take on things. This story is not a rehashing of what happened in Andrew's story, but what happened between the two of them sort of does come up, you know, in her story, and so you kind of get to see it from the way that she sees it. River is primarily of German and Swedish descent. Her eyes are ice blue and sort of have like a yellowish lime color around her pupil. And I actually found some eyes that match that very, very nicely. She's 5'2". Now I won't have to go too in depth about her physical traits once again, because you can see them. She's got dyed pink hair that's applied sloppily over her natural color, some grown out roots. She's got several piercings in each ear. And what I haven't done yet is blush her hands, which one of her distinctive characteristics in physical appearance or things that she always has or always does, she always has rainbow nail polish. So eventually I will be painting her nails each a different color. I'll go ahead and share her beliefs with you and her fun facts. River doesn't have any firm beliefs. She doesn't have a belief system she follows. She doesn't necessarily believe that there's just a big black nothing after death. I guess she doesn't really think about the topic too often. The fun facts about her: she is a naturally gifted photographer. River wishes to go to college, but she doesn't get very good grades, and she tells Andrew that she's trying to get some type of scholarship that has to do with her natural talents for photography in order to get into college, because she has a knack for English, which plays a part in the story, but other than that, she struggles in a lot of her classes. River is definitely more emotionally intelligent rather than being book smart. Often thinks of herself as an only child. Despite having a half-brother, she actually doesn't really know her brother very well. He was taken away from her mom before River was born. Before River's dad and her mom got together, her mom dealt with some addiction issues. That's also how River's mom ended up passing away. She passed away of an overdose. She relapsed when River was 9. Again, another reason that she feels that she can connect with Andrew, because she knows how that feels. Even though she was young, she felt every bit of it. River's favorite animal are birds, and it's because she envies them for their freedom. River is a very free-spirited person. She is the type of person who kind of wishes that she could just run away one day and never have to look back and have nothing tying her to where she is. She likes to feel completely independent within herself. You know, all she needs is the clothes on her back and she'll go. Speaking of clothes, River's favorite color is yellow, but she refuses to ever wear it. She doesn't think it looks good on her, therefore, even though she paints her nails in a rainbow, she never includes yellow. River also does not particularly like candy or anything sweet. She doesn't have much of a sweet tooth, and Andrew thinks she's absolutely crazy for that. He loves anything chocolate, anything and everything. He's got a massive sweet tooth, so he just thinks that this is absurd. She loves the smell of the pavement after it rains. She also loves the way the pavement smells when it's really hot outside, the way the scent kind of like radiates into the air and it feels kind of thick. She also really loves the smell of fresh cut grass. River really enjoys nature. That's kind of her biggest subject as far as photography goes. Anything to do with nature and being in the forest or being around a meadow full of flowers. River ends up moving in with her uncle when her dad decides to move out of state to go and pursue a new relationship. She feels like her dad kind of ditched her, and the only way that she could reasonably stay with her friends within a an approximate vicinity of them was to move in with her uncle, who is about an hour away from the town that she grew up in. As a result, she goes to a new school, but at least she can still see the other people in her life. River is angry at her dad for leaving, but she did make that sacrifice. She just thinks it's unfair that she had to choose in the first place. Her biggest downfall. Now, this isn't entirely revealed in Andrew's story. It shows signs of itself, this large flaw, but Andrew kind of has these like rose-colored glasses on, you know, when he looks at her. He thinks that she could never do a wrong in the world except break his heart. He doesn't really see her nature entirely clearly, and that being that River's not very self-aware, and this ends up causing a lot of conflict between her and her friends. The way that she interacts with other people throughout her story, you begin to see more of a pattern. She is often interpreted as a hypocrite. She is always willing to be the person to stand up for others, even if she does it inappropriately so, she'll do it. But she fails to recognize her own flaws. Now, admittedly, she wishes that she could just run away. She wishes she could just drop everything and go anytime anything gets tough. All of these things that she tries to help other people through, she never does for herself. She's not working on her own life or fixing her own problems. She's trying to fix other people's when they didn't ask. It starts to make her seem judgmental. Even though she's generally a good-intentioned person, that doesn't mean that she always does the right thing, even though she preaches it all the time. She always has all of these opinions on other people's lives and their choices. River's often reckless. She's loud and she's big-mouthed. Not in the way that she would tell all your secrets, but big-mouthed in the sense of she doesn't always know how to bite her tongue. This begins to catch up with her. It gets her into trouble. She causes sometimes conflict for other people on their behalf because of the things she says and the things that she does. These are character qualities that she will have to work on, and she avoids working on. But Andrew doesn't always get the brunt of this behavior. He's not always seeing all of the negative effects. He likes to think he knows her a lot better than he actually does. So on a more positive note, River's birthday is May 28th. She's a Gemini. But other than that, she has double jointed thumbs that she shows off a lot. She thinks that's pretty cool.